Hey guys, it's Leah. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new, and welcome to my September wrap up. September was definitely the best reading month I have had all year, especially in quantity and also slightly in quality. I had a 5-star read, I had a couple of 4.5 stars. I definitely had some disappointing ones, but overall I'm so happy with how the reading month went. And as always with all of my wrap ups, we are going to be going from worst to best. Let's get straight on into it because we have a lot to talk about. So of course, starting with the worst book that I read in September was one of the last ones that I actually read, and it was A Swan's Neck on the Butcher's Block by Jenny Fagan. I'm going to keep my thoughts fairly brief on this because I did read it in my most recent 24-hour readathon video, and I really went in depth there because it was a very interesting experience. As I said in that video, I initially picked this up expecting it to be a horror book but told through poetry. I was severely wrong. It is literally just a poetry collection. I absolutely adore poetry. I'm a huge poetry lover. I always read some poetries. I like read big collections at a time, and I haven't really picked up a new poet for a while. I had read one thing by Jenny Fagan before, which was Hex. It is a fiction book and I absolutely adored it. That is like a 5-star, 6-star read for me, so I was really excited for this. But honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I just don't think her poetry is for me. I kind of went into it, as I said, with different expectations than what it really was, so it did kind of let me down. Also, as I said in that video, I'm not rating this book. I wouldn't even know what to rate it, and it just doesn't feel like a sort of book I want to rate. So this one stands as unrated, and unfortunately my least favourite of the month. My second least favourite of the month was one that was actually quite surprising to me because I have read so much from this author and I have adored so much of this author, and that is Junji Ito, specifically Censor. I literally read this in one day whilst I was at work, and I love Junji Ito. If you don't know who Junji Ito is, he is one of the most famous horror manga artists. I want to say that I've probably read like 5 or 6 of his horror mangas, so I'm not kind of new when it comes to Junji Ito, but this is probably one of my least favourite collections from him. And honestly, again, not for any particular reason, I just found that the stories in this one as not grotesque, because his books definitely are grotesque. He could write anything and it will be grotesque. They just unfortunately didn't capture me the way that so many of his other collections have, but honestly that doesn't really take away much from him for me because I've adored so many and I'm still currently reading one. I'm so excited to read more. Censor unfortunately was just my least favourite collection from him, so again with this I don't really have too many thoughts on it. It just was what it was. I'm happy that I actually read it, but it wasn't much. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Okay, and the next worst book that I read was another one that was a 3-star read for me, and this one actually kind of hurt. I absolutely adore S.T. Gibson. I've spoken about their books so many times across all of my platforms. I always am raving about them, especially when it comes to the autumn. A Diary of Blood is a 5-star read from me. I loved An Education in Malice. I loved Evocation, and then I read a proof copy of Odd Spirits, and I rated it 3 stars. Odd Spirits is a prequel novella to Evocation. Evocation I read a couple of months ago and I absolutely loved it when I read it. I ended up rating it 4 stars. Going into Odd Spirits, I was really excited. If you know anything about Evocation, we are essentially following Reese and Moira, and also David. Evocation is kind of a dark academia fantasy that focuses on the occult. There's discussions on polyamory, but Odd Spirits specifically focuses on Moira and Reese's relationship and how they came to become a couple, and I was so excited for that because I loved reading about them in Evocation so much. Honestly, Odd Spirits just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I really did expect it to be a prequel where we genuinely see like when they first met, and we definitely did, but it wasn't. It was more like a slice of life into their already established marriage, which, please don't get me wrong, I loved reading about them, having anything about them. I would read anything about them, genuinely. It could be like 5 pages, it could be 500 pages. I'm still going to read anything to do with them, especially if David is in it, and he was also in Odd Spirits briefly, but it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I did really enjoy it. I did, and I am happy that I read it. It just didn't feel needed. It didn't feel like a prequel that we needed to read in order to carry on with the series, which is absolutely fine, but that's not really what I wanted from it, unfortunately. Then have another one that I read in my 24-hour readathon. I went very much in depth with this book in there, and that is Graveyard Shift by ML Rio. This was of course my first ever ML Rio. It's kind of an ongoing joke. At this point it's a sick joke and I hate it that I still have not read If We Were Villains. So naturally this was my first ML Rio. I went into it not really knowing anything. I didn't really have any expectations. I'd never read anything from her before, so I didn't even know what her writing style was like or if I was going to like it. This is her brand new release and it is very much a horror novella. Like, it is tiny, and I'm not gonna lie, my feelings on this were conflicting but also clear as day. Graveyard Shift essentially just follows a group of insomniacs. I really do think that it's best going into this not really knowing anything at all, solely because it is so short, and equally dare I say, not that much happens in it. I love a fever dream book, an unreliable narrator, a sort of ambiguous story more than the next person. They are some of my favourite reads, and this I would say definitely falls into fever dream, but not in the sort of way that I like. I love being confused when it comes to reading a book, especially one that is fever dream, but I still want to know what is going on. I still want to feel like something is happening, and this unfortunately felt so slow, which is not what I wanted for a book that's just over 100 pages. I will absolutely say that ML Rio writes atmosphere and an eerie atmosphere so perfectly. This one is definitely one to read at night. I did read it in my 24-hour readathon literally in the morning, so I do kind of wish I saved it for the evening, because the setting that she paints really is so dark and eerie and dingy and a little bit gross. So for that, I really enjoyed it, but in terms of plot and character, it unfortunately just didn't really do anything for me. So I am a little bit more apprehensive about going into If We Were Villains, but everyone over on my TikTok has very much reassured me that If We Were Villains is incredible, and a lot of people that rated that 5 stars didn't like this one as much. That does very much reassure me. I'm still excited to read If We Were Villains. But yeah, my first experience with ML Rio probably wasn't the best one, but I liked it enough. 3 stars. We then had a book that I had been anticipating to read all year, and unfortunately again was another one that didn't really live up to my expectations for it. And this one again really hurt. It was One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I feel like I've mentioned how much I wanted to read this book for the entirety of the year, and I finally got around to it in September. And it was just so sad. This was another one that I filmed my entire experience for in this video, where I went very in depth with my thoughts, but to briefly touch it upon it here. If you don't know what One Dark Window is about, it is essentially an adult gothic fantasy duology set on tarot cards, and the whole magic system is surrounding cards. My number one takeaway from this was how unique the magic system was. I haven't read still too many fantasy books, and I feel like a lot of the ones that I have read, for one reason or another, absolutely down to the ones that I'm just picking, do sometimes feel quite similar, especially in terms of their magic system, but this one felt so unique. I thought the atmosphere was also so great. I do completely agree when everyone says that this is a perfect one to read in autumn. I'm so happy that I did pick this up, and Two Twisted Crowns, the second book in this duology, is on my October TBR, so I'm intrigued to see how I feel about that one. I think my main gripes with this were the plot and the characters. I loved the plot at the beginning. I thought the plot at the beginning, the first half of the book, definitely carried it for me in comparison to the second. I didn't feel anything for our protagonist, and I didn't feel anything for our love interest, and especially when it came to the romance, I didn't care, unfortunately, which is so sad, because I love the romance in a fantasy book. That is sometimes my favourite element. This one, unfortunately, with the characters, just didn't do it for me. I did enjoy the writing. I thought that it was quite well written. I don't know what it was. Something about this book just felt missing. However, based on everything that I said about this book in the vlog that I read it, a lot of people said that they do think I'm going to prefer the second book. So we're going to see how that is going to compare. I definitely want to film my experience again for a reading vlog. I'm just very intrigued to carry on and see where it goes, but One Dark Window unfortunately was a 3 star for me. It wasn't my favourite. Then the books did start slightly getting better, which filled me with a little bit of hope, but this one was still a 5-star prediction, and it was very far from it, and that was The Book of All Loves by Agustin Fernandez Marlowe. Again, another one that I spoke about all of the time. In terms of my excitement for it, how much I did think I was going to rate it 5 stars, and unfortunately it was a 3.5. This book is so incredibly unique. On the back it's kind of pitched as a post-apocalyptic sort of read, but honestly it isn't entirely fiction. It simultaneously reads like poetry and essays and little snippets of non-fiction and also fiction, and for that I thought it was so unique. I thought it was so interesting, but it did make it a book that I only felt like I could read when I was kind of in the mood for it. There were also certain elements of the story and the book in general that I loved a lot more than others. For example, I found the essay elements very interesting. As the title suggests, The Book of All Loves, it is literally a book talking about every different facet and form of love, literally to a point and to a T, of things that you wouldn't even consider, and for that it was really interesting. It was a read that I am genuinely so happy that I did pick up. But when it actually came to the bigger pieces of writing in the past, I don't really want to say too much just in case anyone decides to pick it up. Those were my least favourite parts, and it felt like that took a bigger chunk of the story than all of the bits that I actually enjoyed. As I said, I am really happy that I read it. I have never had anyone else really talk about it, so I'd be really intrigued to see if other people agree with my opinions. But yeah, a very unique read. I would recommend it to a very specific audience. A little bit of a shame that it wasn't 5 stars, but it was a 3.5. Next in this ranking would have to be another one that I read in my 24-hour readathon, and that was Nothing But the Rain. This was another novella, another sort of horror novella, dystopian novella. This one and its entire concept was so fascinating to me, and that was one of the biggest reasons that I really loved it. In Nothing But the Rain, we are essentially following a world where it just doesn't stop raining, but if you are touched by the rain, you will lose pieces of your memory. And not necessarily your newest memories, but memories throughout any point in your life. And I just loved hearing about how these characters adapted to that and how they carried on and they lived in this like post-apocalyptic world. I love a post-apocalyptic read. I love a dystopian read, and for that I really enjoyed this. I do wish that I resonated with the characters a lot more than I did. I definitely think that there were certain elements I probably would have enjoyed this book a lot more if it was an actual novel and not necessarily a novella. It is one that I will absolutely be returning to. I love rereading post-apocalyptic books, as I always say, but especially if it is so short. I'm probably going to reread this countless times, to be honest. This one is one that I would definitely recommend. I ended up rating it 3.75, but I did kind of rate it a 4 on Goodreads. It very much borderlines those, but this one I would definitely recommend. Then is a book that I'm not really going to say anything about because, dare I say, I have an entire reading vlog coming with spoilers, non-spoilers for this entire series. The next book in the ranking would be The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I'm not saying anything about this. There is a vlog that is going to come very soon. Next we have Slewfoot by Brom. This one I read in this video. I feel like so many of the books that I read in September were solely for videos, so I'm really sorry if I'm repeating a lot of the same things that you might already heard. This is one of the most atmospheric autumnal books I have ever read. In this we are set in Connecticut in 1666. We follow a protagonist who basically hates her life. She kind of has to survive off of the means of men and experiences a lot of grievances with men, as you can imagine a woman does in 1666. Honestly, for that, the first half of this book was infuriating to read, but then when we got into the second half and the way that our protagonist and our main character just sort of took revenge, took her own, it was very much I support women's wrongs as well as their rights. I really enjoyed this. This is definitely a horror that I would recommend for fans of the occult, for folk horror. I really loved it. The atmosphere definitely was my #1 favourite part of this book. It's one that again I definitely would love to revisit in future years in autumn, but if you are looking for a good folk horror to read this season, this is definitely the one. I ended up rating it 4 stars. Then we have the first book that I read in September, and honestly when I was compiling all of these books that I read throughout the month together, I couldn't believe that this was September. Like, September felt a million years long, and it was The Ministry of Time by Kayleen Bradley, another one that again I read in a video, and I really enjoyed this. This was a book that I read because it was one of the most popular books of 2024. I saw so many people raving about it, not only online and on TikTok and on booktube, but equally in the bookshop that I work at. This was one of the best sellers. Everyone was talking about it, everyone was recommending it to me. I just finally had to read it. Did it live up to the expectation that I had? No, but that is solely because I genuinely thought I was going to rate this 5 stars. I had such high expectations for it, and unfortunately it wasn't a 5 star. But that absolutely does not diminish this book at all, and it is still one that I would 100% recommend. In The Ministry of Time, we are essentially following a group of expats who visit the future, but their future is our present day, and it is very much a story about them adapting to our present day and things like technology and pop culture references, and I found that fascinating. It was so interesting to read from characters who don't experience things that we experience every day, like in real life, and I found that so good because it was such an interesting portrayal of what people in the past would probably think about everything that we experience now and things that we genuinely do sometimes take for granted. That was definitely my favourite part of this book. In this we do also have a little bit of a romance subplot, definitely a subplot, but one that again I really loved. I loved the protagonist in this so much. I thought the characterization was incredible. I loved the writing style. I thought it was equally humorous as it was serious and really deep. I just loved this. I can 100% see why so many people adore it this year. Honestly, I'm expecting this to be on so many people's favourites of the year. I don't know if it will quite make mine because I did only end up rating it 4 stars, but I'm so happy that I finally read it. It was definitely one that I was putting off from intimidation, but I loved it. I ended up rating it 4 stars. Would highly recommend. Next we are on to my top 4 books of September. I adore, and I could genuinely, like, these 4 books are so different, and these 4 books are living simultaneously in my brain for the past month. I cannot stop thinking about them. But the 4th best book that I read in September was Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I had been wanting to read this one for a while, and then it got shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I hope that this wins. I do say that it is still the only one that I've read. I definitely have interest in reading some of the other ones. I definitely want to read the winner, but I hope that this one wins. It was incredible. This is genuinely unlike any book I've ever read before, and it is also so short. It is a novella, and I cannot recommend it to anyone enough. Even if you've never read a book like this like I had, please try buy it and please pick it up. It is essentially following, I think, a group of 6 astronauts as they make their way and their ascension to the moon, and it is so beautiful. I can't even really explain what this is about. I really do feel like it is a read steeped in humanity, in love, and wanting to experience and the outer body world of space, how humans take advantage of the earth and the natural world. It was such a beautiful read. It made me tear up multiple times, and it is literally just over 100 pages. Honestly, the writing, the characterization was phenomenal. I'm definitely a reader who, for me, writing absolutely carries a story. Sometimes I definitely do read books where the writing isn't as great as other ones and I prefer the plot or I prefer the characters, and that gives it a higher rating. But for me, 9 times out of 10, a book will become my favorite if I fall in love with the writing and I resonate with the writing. The writing in a book is definitely the first thing that I pick up on, and that was the exact same for this book, and it works so much in its favor because this book was so beautiful. I really cannot even explain it. I really do. Just please trust my recommendation. Please give it a try. Again, I'm so happy it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I honestly would love to see it win. I don't know if it will because I know it is up against some very strong popular contenders. I loved it so much. It's one that's definitely going to stay with me for a really long time. Please read it. I ended up rating it 4 stars, but it's probably more a 4.5, 4.75. As I said, all of these books are incredibly different because then we have yours truly by Abby Jimenez, The Duality of Man. I have fallen in love with Abby Jimenez. Obviously, previous to this, I had only read Part of Your World. That was a 4.5 star romance for me. I still genuinely cannot stop thinking about it, so I had to go on to yours truly. And dare I say, I love this just as much as I did Part of Your World, which I really was not expecting because a lot of people do tend to prefer that one. But it was so good. I don't know what crack Abby Jimenez puts in her books, but they work for me so much. And I honestly wanted to start just for the summer, and I did start. If you saw it on my Goodreads, I'm so sorry. I did start just for the summer, but then I was craving all of the spooky reads. I'm definitely going to read just for the summer the second that I don't really care to read the seasonal reads, but it's taking a back step for now because I know it's going to be 5 stars. I just want to read it at the right time. In yours truly, we are following Brianna, who is a doctor, and one day Jacob, a new doctor, very much comes into her sort of ward, and she is instantly feeling very threatened by him. Brianna's boss is retiring, and Brianna is next in line to kind of step up into that role, but her boss very much tells her, you know, we're going to give you a fair chance, babe. Jacob could be the person instead. Brianna is not having it, and I loved her character so much. Jacob is literally looks like a cinnamon roll, is a cinnamon roll. I don't read a lot of romances with that sort of character, but oh my god, I fear I'm gonna have to now because I fell in love with him. I am so excited to read just for the summer, and Abby Jimenez's book in April next year has very recently been announced. Happy birthday to me. She is definitely an author who is going to take up so much brain space for me, and I'm going to just become absolutely infatuated with. So that was yours truly, 4.5 stars. I love them. And then the second best book that I read in September is another romance, which actually kind of does surprise me, I'm not gonna lie. And that, of course, was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. This is a book that I had on my radar for months and I wanted to read for so long. This was a book that I read in my Booktubers Choose What I Read for a Week video. This was picked for me by Sarah and Heather, and I'm so happy that they picked it for me because I fell head over heels for it. I love this for so many reasons. I love the protagonists as individuals. I love the protagonists when they came together, their tension, and equally their communication. This romance was so refreshing. Their communication was so refreshing. It was such a breath of fresh air, and I adored it for that. I also absolutely adore that there is a romance book with so much hype like this that has physical disability representation that we need to see more of. We need more disability representation in books. This book was just everything. It absolutely lives up to the hype. The humor. Hannah Bonham Young is so funny in person, but especially in this book, like the humor had me genuinely laughing out loud, and that never happens to me when I read. Fell head over heels for this. Another romance that I'm so happy that I finally got around to reading, and another 4.5. I loved it. And then last but certainly not least, the best book that I read in September is very different to the last two I just spoke about. It is Martyr by Kavir Akbar. This was another one that I read at the very beginning of the month for my reading the most popular books of 2024 video, and oh my god, so many people told me before I picked this up that I was going to rate this 5 stars, and they would be very surprised if I didn't rate it 5 stars. And for the first half of the book, honestly, it was sitting on a very high 4.5 stars, but the ending and just the way that this entire book wrapped itself together, I had to rate it 5 stars. It couldn't be anything else other than a 5 star. In Martyr, we are following Cyrus, who is a protagonist who is incredibly flawed and incredibly traumatized. He has lived a life, and he's very young, he's in his 20s, but he's lived a life with a lot of trauma. I do definitely want to preface that this is not a book that you read for enjoyment. This is a book that will rip your heart out. It really moved me. It really mended something and also simultaneously broke something in me, and I loved it. it. I'm really sorry that the lighting keeps changing. I know it's the most annoying thing in the world, and I know I've mentioned it before. I'm 99% sure that my camera might be on its way out. Martyr was absolutely incredible due to all of the trauma that he has experienced in his life. He is a character who wants to become a martyr. He wants his life, but he especially wants his death to mean something due to the fact that his parents' death didn't really mean anything. They died in very mundane, I suppose, circumstances, and now he just wants to be a martyr. He wants his death to mean something and to matter in the grand scheme of things, and it is very much a novel about uncovering that trauma and uncovering that grief. There is a character in this. I don't really want to say anything because I went into this very blind, but if you've read this you'll know there is one character in this, the sort of like older character that absolutely, I don't think I've ever read a character in a book ever that has moved me the way that she did. This was one of the most beautiful books that I've ever read in my entire life. It undoubtedly is a 5-star. It couldn't be anything else. I'm so happy that I finally read it and that I also vlogged my experience reading it. This is very likely to be up there with one of my favorite books of the year. I'm so happy that I read it, and also thank you so much to anyone who had recommended it to me prior. I loved it so much. 5 stars. But yeah, those were all of the books that I read in September from worst to best. Oh my god. If you read any of these books, please let me know what you thought about them, whether you liked them, whether you disliked them, if any of them are on your radar, if they're also on your TBR. What was also your favourite book that you read in September? If you watch until the very end of the video and you don't really know what to comment any green or pink emoji for Martyr. And yeah, as always guys, thank you so much for being here and for spending some time with me. I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again very, very soon in another video.